The evac was behind schedule. Supplies miscounted. Weather turning. Everyone looked to the wrong screens, arguing over flight slots that no longer mattered. Engines idled. The air cracked with rotor wash and static. Somewhere in the commotion, she stepped away from the checklist. No one stopped her. She moved past the wire. Boots low. Eyes steady. One unit hadn't returned. The count was off. No one else saw it. No one else went. By the time they noticed, the ramp was already closing, and she was inside 2 lives beside her. One in her arms. The manifest still says, "No update filed." The dust shifted constantly, stirred by the rhythmic churn of rotors and boot fall. On the tarmac, pallets were locked down in hurried increments. Straps checked twice. Then once more. Everything moved like muscle memory, now 8 minutes to wheels up. The C-130 sat ready with bay doors yawning open. Tail ramp hot from sun, and the air was thick with heat. The static tension of departure not yet called. Staff Sergeant Riley Nash stood to the left of the loading line, one glove clipped to her harness. The other hand, steady on the manifest board. The sheet was stiff with sweat curls, creased at the corners. 6 columns inked in black. A few in red putter. 2 marked faintly in pencil. She wasn't on the flight crew today. Her assignment was final load confirmation. Everyone around her treated it like cleanup duty. No one questioned that she could do it alone. She glanced at the clock mounted inside the hangar entry. 7 minutes now. The noise on the line had changed. Voices were louder but less distinct. The kind of raised speech people used when they were done, being careful. One of the officers from operations passed by and tapped the ramp with a wrench out of habit. He called out something about one more vehicle coming in. She nodded, but her focus stayed on the names. She flipped the page with her thumb and paused. Corporal Hagen, K9 unit. Last recorded location was Alpha 3 perimeter. Expected return 1 hour prior. No check-in noted. Sable listed as attached MWD. 2 blanks. No corrections. No strike-throughs. No update. Riley looked toward the outer berms. The light was flatter now. Smoke layering the edges of the camp perimeter. A few figures moved between tents. None of them military working dog teams. She checked the patrol board behind the main comms vehicle. The return markers were layered, overlapping, smudged with red grease pencil. Hagen's unit wasn't crossed out, just hanging there. She stepped closer to the nearest comms NCO, a young sergeant pulling his harness loose by the radio array. She asked without raising her voice, "Corporal Hagen come through yet?" The sergeant didn't look up. If he's not on the manifest, he's already out. Maybe bumped early. His tone wasn't dismissive. Just done with questions. K9 second usually rotate back in on earlier lifts anyway. Riley kept her voice level. Not what his patrol record says. The sergeant offered a half shrug. Then he missed it. Clock's down to 6. I'd worry about cargo. Not dogs. She said nothing. Walked back toward the bay ramp. A crewman waved her over and pointed at the last crate being wheeled into place. She nodded once, climbed halfway up the ramp, and logged the load weight by hand. Her pencil smudged a little against the paper. Behind her, the engines were starting to growl louder. Heat shimmer building beneath the wings. The call hadn't come yet, but everyone could feel it lining up. She checked the manifest again. This time slower. Hagen's line still blank. She made a light tick in pencil beside his name. Just a dot. Then she looked back toward the perimeter. 5 minutes now. She didn't speak again. Didn't call for a confirmation. The oversight wasn't hers. But the absence was. Something in the timing didn't sit right. Too quiet. Too late. Others passed by. Not noticing that she hadn't moved. One of the flight techs slapped her shoulder lightly. Assuming she was checking the ramp weight, another voice, shouting from the crew tent, called for final roll. It blurred against the engine rise. Riley didn't hear it. Or rather, she heard everything else more clearly. The hum of tension, the missing link, the kind of gap you don't see until you're looking straight at it. 4 minutes. She folded the manifest, slid it into her belt pouch. Then she turned and looked. Not at the C-130, not at the crew, but past the wire edge of the compound toward the tree line, and she didn't look away. The day had started with a low haze curling across the gravel paths between the hangars, the kind that caught in the throat before sunrise and turned to sweat by noon. Inside the prep tent, the morning roster had been taped to the inside of a supply locker, 3 columns, marked in red grease pencil: crew, flight, support. Staff Sergeant Riley Nash was already dressed out. Gloves clipped to her belt. Boots scuffed clean. Clipboard in hand. Her name sat squarely in the 3rd column. Support. She didn't say anything, just ran her eyes down the sheet and moved past it without hesitation. The tent was loud. Fold-out chairs. Empty cans of electrolyte drink. Flight bags half-zipped on the floor. 2 loadmasters leaned over a small crate, arguing about whether it could clear ramp width with a side tie instead of center lashing. Another was already halfway through a breakfast bar, speaking between chews while gesturing with his pen. None of them paused as Riley passed. She picked up the manifest folder from the supply crate and flipped it open without ceremony. There were 6 pages. She scanned them quickly, eyes adjusting to the tight typeface and faded copy. 4 units marked for early lift-out, 1 listed for standby, 1 delayed the K9 unit. She found the return time penciled on the 3rd page, 1000 hours. That was fine, except the departure stamp next to it had a dash instead of a value. She tilted her head slightly, flipped back to the check-in log, and saw the last outbound patrol listed at 0730. Most had returned. 1 was pending. She picked up her pencil, marked a clean dot beside the name Corporal Hagen, then underlined the phrase, "No timestamp logged," with a steady hand. She wasn't a signal officer. She wasn't even assigned to status verification, but she checked anyway. Behind her, a voice cut across the tent. "Careful. Nash, you triple-check that hard. You'll crack the paper." It was Sergeant Delaney, standing with 1 boot on a supply crate, sleeves rolled up higher than regulation allowed. He was smiling, but only halfway. Riley didn't answer. She closed the folder and clipped it into her harness. With 1 practiced motion, Delaney stepped closer, still holding a cargo strap over one shoulder. "Seriously, though, it's evac, not a math test. You're going to give that clipboard PTSD." Someone laughed behind him. Another muttered something about bean counters in uniform. The joke barely rippled the tent air. It wasn't cruel, just routine. It passed like it always did, thin, unimportant, absorbed into the ambient shuffle of final prep noise. Riley stepped back toward the pallet row. Her checklist was still folded at her side. The same corner, she always tucked into her belt loop. One of the crew chiefs waved her toward Bay 3. She gave a nod, adjusted hair vest strap, and moved. She didn't explain the dot she'd drawn. She didn't mention the missing timestamp. She knew by now that talking through blanks didn't get them filled faster, and no one ever asked her what she saw in the gaps. She just kept counting. The ramp groaned beneath her boots as Riley Nash logged the last crate weight. 1 strap wasn't cinched properly, but she didn't stop to correct it. Her eyes flicked to the edge of the flight line where the last team was boarding. Weapons slung low, faces tight with exhaustion. The load chief barked a checklist over the intercom. One of the crew waved toward Riley. She called back without pause. Voice even. "I've got 1 more crate to check. I'll meet you at SEAL call." They nodded, and turned away. She moved off the ramp quickly, but without haste. The second her boots hit the gravel, she veered sharp left, ducking behind a line of stacked gear pallets and passing under the shadow of the command tent. The sound of rotors filled the air, distant but building. A haze of hot dust swirled at shin level, rising from the tarmac like breath from concrete. She pulled her harness free and let it drop beside the rear axle of a fuel cart, quiet as a shrug. One quick motion brought her sidearm from storage to her hip. Her fingers brushed the folded manifest, still tucked under her beltline. No one called after her. No one was looking. She slipped through the north fence gap, where the wire had been bent for cargo routing 2 days ago. There was no guard posted now. The base was collapsing inward, attention drawn to the ramp and the countdown. 5 minutes remained. Beyond the wire, the terrain shifted fast, flat scrub, giving way to low tree clusters and broken structures from the outpost's older perimeter. She crouched at the edge of a dried tire rut, studied the ground. There were boot prints, uneven and recent. Close to them, a deeper mark, 4 prints in tandem. Narrow and spaced, like a dog's, too large for strays. She touched one with her gloved fingers. Still soft. She rose and moved. Each step was measured. The dust silenced the edges of her tread, but the terrain was laced with fractured metal and loose stone. Her breath stayed even. She passed a rusted drum, then the jagged outline of a burned container shell. No signs of life. No sounds beyond the distant thunder of engines, warming. But ahead, near the base of a leaning tree, the air shifted. She saw it all at once, cracked wood paneling from a shack that had collapsed at one corner. Debris scattered outward. One wall had been scorched, blackened in a half-moon arc. Beside the frame, a splash of red against pale concrete. Not much, just enough to register. And on a shard of broken door frame, a patch of black fur. Riley didn't slow. She stepped into the ruin's shadow, drawing her weapon low, finger resting off trigger. Her eyes adjusted fast. The smell of ash was faint, but real. No fresh fire. Just the residue of impact. Something had struck hard pressure. Maybe concussion. The shack hadn't burned. It had been lifted, then dropped. She scanned left, then right. Movement in the far corner. A blur of tan fabric beneath broken beams. Not enough to confirm, just enough to risk. She reached once to her belt and touched the paper folded there. Still present. Then she took one silent breath, crouched, and entered. The field just beyond the motor pool didn't have an official name, but the handlers used it often enough that the brush stayed low and the dirt stayed packed. Riley had passed it dozens of times during routine checks. Always peripheral. Always quiet. That afternoon, the wind was still, and the sun burned high without drama. She was off duty, walking without purpose. Hands tucked into the sides of her sleeves, boots scuffing lightly along the edge of the wire, mesh fencing. She saw them before they saw her. Corporal Hagen, sleeves down, kneeling beside his partner. The dog large, brindled coat. Ears slightly turned, moved in a tight circle on command. They weren't running drills. No bite sleeve. No high-stress voice cues. Just a rhythm between them. Slow and practiced. Hagen murmured something under his breath. The dog tilted his head slightly, then sat, still, watching. Riley stopped at the edge of the field, said nothing. She stayed long enough for Hagen to notice, though it took him a minute. When he did, he stood slowly, brushing his palms on his pants. The motion habitual. He gave a small nod toward her. Not kite a greeting. He listens better than my CO. Hagen said. Tone dry, but not sharp. Don't tell command. Riley took a few steps forward, stopping just short of the outer marker stake. The dog didn't move. His eyes tracked her. Not aggressively. Just aware. "What's his name?" she asked. "Sable. 2 tours. He still thinks he's new." Riley crouched down slowly, letting the pause stretch between each motion. Sable didn't retreat. She extended her hand. Palm turned slightly inward. Not toward his muzzle, but toward the tag, hanging from the front of his vest. "No one left." She read softly. The letters were embossed in matte black on a field of dark nylon. Nearly invisible, except in slanted light. He picked it. Hagun said. "Or maybe I did. But he wears it like he means it." Riley didn't smile. She didn't pet the dog. Either. Her fingers touched the side of the vest, pressing once against the mesh strap and letting it rest there. Sable stayed motionless. Not tense. Just still. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward her and let out a single quiet breath through his nose. "That's new." Hagun noted. He doesn't usually let people touch his harness. Not unless they're on his count. She didn't ask what that meant. He didn't explain it further. They stood there a while longer, saying little. Sable lay down at Hagen's feet, but not between them. He stayed close to both of them, as if the triangle made sense. When Riley stood, she brushed off the front of her trousers without thought and pulled a narrow strip of gauze from her belt pocket. It had been folded and refolded too many times. More habit than supply item. She dropped it without fanfare near Sable's side. "For scent," she said. Hagen gave a short nod. "He'll remember." Riley turned to leave. She didn't look back. Now, as she moved through the wreckage near the collapsed shack, the memory folded quietly back into place. The dust was thicker here, and her steps slowed to a near crawl. Her hand brushed the inside edge of her belt and touched something dry, just the corner of that same gauze, still folded. She didn't take it out. She just moved forward. Sable would remember. And she did too. The air inside the collapsed shack held the stale taste of smoke and grit, dense and unmoving. Riley Nash dropped to a low crouch, scanning corners with methodical precision. Muzzle down. Finger off trigger. Her eyes caught the shape in the back corner first. Not full silhouette, just pieces. A boot, the curve of a leg, fabric torn along the thigh. A low groan came from beneath the slanted timber beam. Corporal Hagen. He was on his side, partially covered in splinters and concrete powder. Face slack, but alive. One arm twitched once before going still. Closer. Near the far wall. The dog stood stiff-legged. Sable. His left flank bore a thin crimson smear. Not actively bleeding, but fresh enough to mark. He growled once as Riley moved. Low and uncertain. She kept her voice flat. "Easy." Sable. She reached to her belt and pulled free the folded gauze. It had frayed at the edges, the fibers matted from time and sweat. But it still carried the right scent. She held it out without approaching further. The growl faded. Sable blinked twice, then limped forward. His steps were slow, deliberate, uneven. He reached her, nose lowering toward the cloth. Riley let him take it. "We're getting him out," she said. Not loud. She moved to Hagen, holstering her weapon. The beam across his chest had pinned him at the ribs, but the angle had spared his spine. She braced her foot against one end, gripped a length of splintered crossbar, and leaned back with her whole body. It gave after a hard wrench. Dust plumed around them. Hagen coughed once. His eyes opened halfway. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck, pulse weak, but steady. "Stay with me," she murmured. There was no stretcher, No proper lift support. She pulled a broken rifle sling from the wreckage pile and looped it through the straps of his vest, locking it with a metal hook from his belt. She braced her back against the debris mound and began to drag the precursors. The first few feet were clean. The ground sloped gently, and most of the brush had already been flattened by the blast. But the soil turned to loose rock at the exit, and the weight shifted unpredictably. Hagen's boot snagged on a beam. She paused, adjusted, pulled again. Her shoulders burned almost instantly, the sling biting through her gloves. Her breath caught and fell in rhythm. Behind her, Sable moved with a stiff trot, one paw dragging every fourth step. He didn't whimper, just kept close. They cleared the edge of the structure as the sound of the engines rose in the distance. The C-130's turbines were spooling now, deep and omnipresent, pressing down from the sky like heat. Less than 2 minutes. She didn't look at the horizon. She dropped her weight low and resumed the pull. Her boots slipped on the incline. The drag harness tilted. She dropped to one knee, reset her grip, and leaned backward, using her whole frame to shift him over a jagged rise in the gravel. Her left glove tore at the palm seam. She switched hands. Her breathing stayed steady, each exhale matching the push of her shoulders. Every movement took more calculation. Her knies hit rock. Her elbow scraped against rusted metal. She didn't check the wounds. There wasn't time. At the first clearing, she paused to reset the dragline. Hagen's head lolled, but stayed supported. She pulled again. Sable stumbled once, then found footing. Riley led with her hips, letting the resistance center through her spine. Sweat ran from her hairline, down the curve of her jaw. The manifest still sat firm against her belt, folded, unread. She could feel the edge pressing into her side every time she shifted left. The engines were louder now. The ramp had to be closing soon. No call would come for her. She made the final push as the ground sloped again, moving toward the distant edge of the base perimeter where the flight path curved. Dust coated her face. Her gloves were slick. Her right shoulder screamed with strain. Still, she dragged. The dog reached the gate first, then Riley, then Hagen, and she never looked back. The first time she heard the engines rise and did nothing. She was 21 and 3 weeks into her deployment. Junior load tech. Barely qualified. Eyes locked on clipboards, more than people. The mission had been humanitarian evacuation from a high-risk flood zone in the Southern Valley. Civil unrest, chasing the waterline from both sides. The pickup point was narrow. An old schoolyard converted to a launch zone. White chalk still ghosted on the cracked concrete. She had done everything by the book. Ramp clear. Gate closed. Passenger count confirmed by comms relay. Not eyes. Her role was to secure the straps and maintain final weight logs. She stood inside the bay, feet shoulder-width apart. Clipboard pressed to her chest. The boy ran into view just as the wheels left the ground. He was maybe 9, maybe 10. Shirt too big. Sandals loose. One hand clutched a weathered shoulder bag, the other outstretched toward the sky. He reached the edge of the landing zone as the dust lifted, the blast from the prop wash throwing his weight back. She could see the panic in his step. Not in his face too much dust, but in how he planted and slipped again. He didn't scream. Just chased the sound. She'd gripped the ramp bar, knuckles white under her glove, pulse beating fast enough to hear. One of the crew chiefs had glanced over, saw her staring. He said nothing. The noise swallowed everything. Protocol said once the ramp sealed and altitude passed the cutoff, no deviations. Her hand was still on the bar when the aircraft banked left. The landing zone shrinking behind them in haze and debris. The boy got smaller. Then he was gone. No one mentioned it. The crew debrief logged a clean extract. No unconfirmed assets. No missed headcount. Her clipboard had no name for the boy. Just the outline of a section group marked local medical assist. A half-dozen refugees had been folded into that category. The line was filled, but she had written his name on the back of the page, Omyad. He'd said it once in the waiting line. When she'd helped him secure a too-big helmet on a cousin's head, she remembered because he spelled it out carefully in the dust at her boot. She never threw that manifest away. It stayed folded behind the hardboard. Ink faded. Smudged by time and heat. She hadn't needed to read it again. Just knowing there was enough. Now, as she dragged Hagen across the gravel, her left hand throbbed with each pull. Her right side pulsed where the manifest pressed into her ribs. The rotors were rising again. Dust was starting to lift. She didn't break pace. She didn't call for help. She wouldn't miss the count this time. The tree line gave way all at once. Like a curtain pulled open by wind and noise. Riley Nash staggered forward, with her left shoulder locked beneath Corporal Hagen's weight. Her steps no longer clean or quiet. Just forward. Sable limped beside her. Flank matted with dried blood. Head low but alert. Dust churned in waves around their boots as the last of the evac kicked into motion. The C-130's tail ramp was already half raised, its undercarriage vibrating with the thrum of full engine throttle. Heat shimmered along the fuselage, rippling the silhouettes of waiting crew. Riley didn't yell. She couldn't. Her throat was dry from grit and exertion. Her arms shook beneath the dead weight of Hagen's upper body. Her right hand clutched the makeshift sling, still looped under his vest. Every tendon in her shoulder burned. But she didn't break stride. She angled toward the right side of the ramp. The only gap still open. Inside the bay, a load tech turned to signal final clearance when he saw her. His arm froze mid-motion. Then he was shouting over the intercom, voice lost in the rise of the engines. A crew chief near the hydraulic panel slammed the override with one palm, the ramp shuddering back down, just enough to hold. She reached the base of the incline and bent low, shifting Hagen's weight higher onto her back. Her boot slipped once on the metal lip, but she corrected before falling. Sable hesitated behind her, then scrambled up the ramp at her side, claws skittering for grip. Two crewmen rushed forward, not to help, but to clear space. Riley half-dragged, half-pushed Hagen over the threshold and collapsed him onto a flat tie-down area near the emergency harness webbing. She dropped beside him for 1 second, then stood again. Sable had frozen just at the lip, his rear leg refusing to bend properly. She stepped back, grabbed the dog's vest with both hands, and hauled him inside. Her arms screamed. Her fingers failed to close all the way once she let go. Sable hit the floor and curled instantly beside Hagen. Breath rasping but steady. The ramp began closing again, its locking arms folding inward with a deep mechanical growl. Dust rose behind them like a wall, catching sunlight in broken specks as the bay sealed tight. Just before the final joint latched, Riley stepped over the lip, her boot thudding once against the floor as it locked into place behind her. No one moved for a full 5 seconds. The bay was loud, not with voices, but with the roar of readiness, the sound of flight, weight, and motion closing in. Someone on headset stepped forward, pulled it off one ear, and blinked toward her. "We thought they were," he began. "They weren't," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. She leaned against the bay wall, hand pressed flat against the bulkhead for balance. Her gloves were half shredded. Her hair stuck to her neck in salt and heat. She could feel the folded manifest at her side. Wet now, crumpled, but still intact. She'd added 2 marks to it on the ground before standing, one for Hagen, one for the dog. No one clapped. No one spoke again. The aircraft lifted in full, the cabin shifting as wheels cleared ground. Inside, the crew moved with purpose, not ceremony. Medical checks, strap-downs. No one asked how she'd gotten out there or what it took to bring them back. She slid down the wall into a sitting position, legs pulled in, head tilted back. Her eyes stayed open. Her breath came in short, tight rhythms, syncing with the rattle of flight. This wasn't luck. It wasn't a miracle. It was the count, and she hadn't missed it. The med tent buzzed with quiet efficiency. No shouting, no alarms. Just the low rhythm of monitors and the occasional clipped conversation between corpsmen moving from cot to cot. Fluorescent lights cast a washed glow across the canvas walls, softening the edges of the day's damage into a manageable haze. Corporal Hagen lay on his side, IV line taped down along his forearm. His chest rose evenly now, slow and steady. Someone had cleaned the worst of the dust from his face. His helmet was gone, boots off, uniform jacket folded at the foot of the cot. Sable slept curled against the base of the frame, his nose tucked into his flank, one ear twitching. With each beep from the monitor overhead, the dog's back leg was splinted, wrapped in a dull gray bandage that matched the tent's interior. Riley Nash sat against the rear gear rack, boots flat on the concrete floor, hands resting on her thighs. She hadn't been checked in. No one had asked. Her gloves were off, one discarded near the exit flap, its palm torn clean through. The other she'd kept, balled loosely in her left hand. Her knuckles were raw. Dirt clung to the creases in her skin. There was a gash along her wrist, already dried. She didn't look at it. Her name hadn't come up in the debrief. They'd listed the K-9 team as recovered, condition stable, evac complete. The pilot made no mention of the delay on-ramp close. The crew chief hadn't flagged the override. The official manifest, cleaned up and submitted within the hour, had no last-minute revisions, no additional check marks. Just a clean line across the board. All units accounted for. Riley reached into her belt pocket and pulled out the folded original. The corners were soft now, edges bent from sweat and motion. The pencil marks were faint but visible. 2 small ticks beside 2 names. Not part of protocol, just hers. A junior tech passed by, half turned to check the wall clock. He slowed as he spotted her, then nodded once. Uncertain. Guess you counted right, he muttered. He didn't wait for a response. Riley didn't offer one. She didn't look up. Instead, she stood slowly, joints stiff from sitting too long, without care. She stepped lightly toward Sable and crouched beside him, one hand reaching forward. She didn't pet his head, just pressed her fingers once against the edge of his vest. Over the tag stitched in black, no one left. Sable didn't stir. Riley let her hand rest there for another moment, then straightened, turned, and walked out of the tent without a word. She wasn't on the flight crew. She wasn't cleared to leave the line. But when the manifest came up short, Riley Nash saw what others missed. No one gave the order. No one noticed her go. She moved anyway into the dust, into the silence. She found the K-9 team, brought them both back, and crossed the ramp as it sealed behind her. The official record never changed. Her name wasn't listed. The count stayed clean, but the folded manifest in her pocket tells the truth. 2 marks. Made in pencil. Quiet. Precise. Just enough to save them. That was all. She wasn't praised. She wasn't even mentioned. But when it mattered, she saw what no one else did and acted without waiting. Riley Nash wasn't the loudest voice or the highest rank. She was the one who stayed quiet, paid attention, and moved when the count was off. Her story isn't about medals or recognition. It's about presence, precision, The kind of loyalty that doesn't need to be seen to be real. In a world full of noise, her strength was in knowing when to act and doing it with nothing more than certainty and grit. If that speaks to you, take a moment to reflect. Stories like Riley's don't make headlines, but they change outcomes. Share your thoughts below or follow along for more stories of quiet courage and the ones who never stop counting.